Here we go.
विस्तारवाद का युग समाप्त हो चुका है. ये युग विकासवाद का है.
Troubles began as early as 2013 when China expanded its Belt and Road Initiative. Massive construction projects in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and the Maldives caused unease in Delhi.
If you ask me, is our relationship normal today? My answer to you is no, it is not.
Do you know what China was doing? I think it's in the South China Sea. China was building out these artificial islands to expand places to put their military and to get closer to other countries, basically. Like they were pushing closer and closer with their ships and everything to other countries, and it's just like they're trying to increase their military power in a way that is making other countries around it uncomfortable. They didn't talk about the artificial islands, but I know that's been a thing. You look at the map and like on the satellites, and new islands are popping up that they created.
What?
And it's just like, it's not good. Yeah.
China is clearly becoming a much stronger military power.
India has also stepped up its participation in the Quad, which is a group of 4 countries, including the US, Australia, and Japan.
बीच में कितना न्यूज़ पे आया था डायमंड नेकलेस.
Hi everybody. In the past 3 episodes of the Geopolitical series, we saw how China started with something called the Belt and Road Initiative to conquer the world trade. Now just to give you a quick recap, firstly, China strategically used Djibouti, Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Pakistan's weak economic situation to surround India. Secondly, China spent billions of dollars into building oil refineries, high-speed cables, railway lines and even gas pipelines to build an alternate trade route around India. And lastly, China is building an extremely strategic railway line from London to China and another railway line from China to Iran, passing to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, finally ending at Tehran in Iran. This is how China is literally building its own trade route to become an economic superpower, and in this process, China intends to surround its rivals like India and eventually gain military and economic advantage over the United States. This is what we have covered until now. Now, when China is doing so many things, India is obviously not a saint to keep quiet and let China become stronger, right? So the question over here is, what exactly is India doing to tackle the security implications of the Belt and Road Initiative? What is India's strategy to face China in case of a military conflict? And lastly, what are the study materials to help you
So you know, India and China have had military conflicts.
Yeah.
Like straight up, like fire, like it's... I haven't read enough about it. I just know that they've had some serious conflicts.
For decades, right?
I don't know how long it's been going on for, but they have border conflicts.
Okay, yeah.
This video is brought to you by Wintwealth, but more on this at the end of the video. The answer to this lies in a very, very important quote by a historian named Alfred Thayer. In his theory of sea dominance, Alfred Thayer said that whoever conquers the Indian Ocean will dominate the whole of Asia. So let's try to understand why is the Indian Ocean so important in geopolitics. Well, if you look at the world map, you will see that the Indian Ocean region consists of 28 countries spanning across 3 continents and covers 17.5% of the global land area. These countries include 21 members of an association called the Indian Ocean Rim Association. This includes major nations like Australia, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Iran, Kenya, Malaysia, Oman, Singapore, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Thailand, UAE and Yemen.
Wow.
Then there are 7 others who are not a part of this association, which includes Brunei, Cambodia, Maldives, Myanmar, Pakistan, Timor-Leste and Vietnam. And this region is home to over 35% of the world's population, which is around 2.6 billion people.
Okay.
Now, if you notice something very peculiar about all these nations that I stated, you will realize that the Indian Ocean region is home to some of the fastest growing countries in the world. Secondly, it is one of the most strategic regions in the world, which falls at the crossroads of the global trade itself. The Indian Ocean connects the international economies in the North Atlantic to the Asia-Pacific region. And secondly, the major sea routes that connect the Middle East, Africa and East Asia with both Europe and America also lie in the Indian Ocean itself. And what is absolutely mind-boggling about the Indian Ocean is that 80% of the entire world's maritime oil trade flows through just 3 narrow passages of the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
These passages are at the Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. These points are what we call as choke points, as in if you choke these points, the major part of the world trade itself will come to a standstill. If this is very, very clear to you, let's understand these choke points better. The Strait of Hormuz is a strait between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. The Strait of Malacca, as you know, is this place between the Malay Peninsula and the Indian Ocean island of Sumatra. The Bab el-Mandeb is a strait between Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula, Djibouti and Eritrea in the Horn of Africa. This strait connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Eden. And apart from these three choke points, we have four more, which are the Mozambique Channel, the Suez Canal, the Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait. Now, if you remember from our previous episode, China has very clearly entered very close to all these choke points. To establish dominance over the Strait of Hormuz, China has the Gwadar port in Pakistan on a 40-year lease.
Wow.
And it also has its infrastructure and railway lines to Iran. To establish dominance over the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal, China has debt-trapped Djibouti to build its naval base. And then, to capitalize on the Strait of Malacca, Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait, China has made strategic alliance with Indonesia to build its infrastructure projects. And if you go through the details of the Chinese relations very closely, you will see that China has already established very close relations with the Mozambique government and has established control over a port called the Dar es Salaam port in Tanzania. So in short, the world trade can be stopped within a jiffy if you have control over these choke points in the Indian Ocean. And at the same time, if you do not have control over these points, your enemy can block your trade in no time. And quite evidently, China has slowly extended its dominance over all these choke points. This is the reason why the Indian Ocean is an extremely crucial region with respect to maritime trade and more importantly for India because of China. But the story does not end here. Apart from maritime trade routes, the Indian Ocean contains some of the most precious resources in the world. In fact, a large portion of the resources of the Indian Ocean is yet to be explored. And it is said that 16.8% of the entire world's reserves and 27.9% of natural gas reserves are in the Indian Ocean itself. And this is where the Indo-China conflict comes in.
The string of pearls theory very simply is that China is trying to encircle India with a number of naval bases in surrounding countries in such a way that it's like a string of pearls around your neck, which the Chinese can then tighten to choke you and choke your neck.
There is a Cold War that is created between India and China.
The string of pearls theory has been discussed for more than a decade, and the Ukraine crisis has renewed interest in the subject.
My answer to that has always been, even if they're trying to do it, which is debatable, I would say that India has a fairly robust neck that is not so easily strangled.
China has very strategically emerged as one of the most important trading partners of the Indian Ocean region, and it accounts for 16.1% of its total goods trade as of 2017. And like we saw in the Belt and Road video, in the past 2 decades, China has been building infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Pakistan and Djibouti. Why? Because all of these regions fall in the trade route of China's oil imports and their exports to Africa, Middle East and Europe. So we have the Gwadar port in Pakistan, Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, Djibouti's naval base and even Myanmar's Quake Phu port. This is what is being called as the strings of pearls theory. Now the burning question over here is, what exactly is India doing to tackle it? Well, instead of openly and boldly announcing its strategy like China, India has been slowly and steadily operating in a stealth mode with something called the necklace of diamonds strategy. To understand this, let's take a look at the list of strategic bases India has set up with partner countries as well as the various trade agreements that India has signed. And by the way, you must have seen a lot of people who often criticize the Prime Minister saying that he's wasting India's money by taking a world tour. Well, for those of you, here's why the Prime Minister of India spends countless hours in traveling all around the world.
हम अपने देश की अखंडता और संप्रभुता के साथ समझौता नहीं करते हैं। जब भी समय आया है, हमने देश की अखंडता और संप्रभुता की रक्षा करने में अपनी शक्ति का प्रदर्शन किया, अपनी क्षमताओं को साबित किया। चाहे स्थिति कुछ भी हो, परिस्थिति कुछ भी हो, भारत पूरी दृढ़ता से देश की एक एक इंच जमीन की, देश के स्वाभिमान की रक्षा करेगा। हमारे लिए भारत की अखंडता और संप्रभुता सर्वोच्च है और इसकी रक्षा करने से हमें कोई भी रोक नहीं सकता।
And regarding the relationships that Modi's building around the globe and whatnot, it reminds me the age-old saying, it's not like how good you are, it's who you know. You know? So, because
yeah, and he's like really likable, it seems like, to other leaders, or at least trying to be.
I associate that with the film industry. It's like, it's not how good your movies are, it's who you know. It's like, everything's about who you know at the end of the day. You know, you can go to school and become a really, really, astute director and whatnot, but if you don't know anybody who can help you get your script in the door, what good are you?
Yeah.
First, let's start from the counter for China's strategic placement at Gwadar and Djibouti. For this, India has very cleverly placed its base over here in Oman, and here's where we have the Dakum port. The Dakum port is where India's important crude imports flow from the Persian Gulf. This place is strategically located on the southeastern seaboard of Oman and is overlooking both the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. On top of that, it is also straddled along the critical sea lanes in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Eden. And all thanks to India's relation with Oman, we have military access to this port, which makes it a great defense point. Then we come to this region that is close to the second choke point, which is the Mozambique Channel. In 2015, Modi ji signed an agreement with the Seychelles president to develop a place called the Assumption Island for military use. But unfortunately, after this deal was done, there were a lot of protests. There was a change in government, because of which this diamond as of now is in a shaky situation. Then we come to perhaps the most important choke point of all, which is the Strait of Malacca and the other two choke points right beside it. Here's where we have the Changi Naval Base, wherein in 2018, Modi ji signed an agreement with the government of Singapore. This agreement has provided direct access to the Indian Navy itself. So while sailing through the South China Sea, the Indian Navy can refuel and rearm its ship through this base. This is followed by the Sabang port in Indonesia. And again, in 2018, India got military access to Sabang port, which is located right at the entrance of the Malacca Strait. So theoretically, we have a firm grip over the Strait of Malacca. And if you remember from our China's BRA video, 70% of China's oil supply and 60% of their trade passes through the Strait of Malacca. So choking this point is like choking the Chinese economy itself.
Wow.
After that,
that's really important. That's extremely important, because if India and China go head to head, like, you choke that portion, that port, they're going to run out of fuel.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of, your military planning and whatnot, is if you don't have fuel for your planes or for your ships or whatever, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Vietnam diamond. And long story short, we have historically had a great relationship with Vietnam. We supply some of the most important defense equipment to Vietnam, and we have signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam in 2016 itself. Then we have our important diamond in Japan. On 9th of September 2020, India and Japan signed something called the Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement that would allow militaries of both these countries to exchange supplies and services on a reciprocal basis. So again, Japan and India can use each other's port as per their strategic requirements. And the best part about this point is that if you look at the map, you will see that it gives us a very, very close placement to the mainland of China itself.
Yep.
And then we have Mongolia, where Modi ji became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit. And more importantly, India has established a very strong relation with Mongolia by giving out a $1 billion credit to develop an air corridor for Mongolia. And lastly, we have the Chabahar port in Iran. And if you remember from our China video, again, Iran is also a part of the Chinese BRI initiative, wherein they have a railway line from China to Iran, passing through Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, to finally ending at Tehran in Iran. So here's where India very cleverly understood the importance of Iran. So in 2015 itself, when Iran was facing crippling economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation, India agreed to develop a deep water port in Chabahar on the Gulf of Oman. And as a part of this deal, Modi ji visited Iran and signed the agreement worth $500 million to develop this port and related infrastructure. And if you see, it's not just strategic with respect to China's infra in Iran, but also very, very close to the Gwadar port in Pakistan. Now, if you connect all these points together on the world map, you will see that it's literally a necklace around China, and more importantly, they are strategically located points that can be used to counter the Chinese in case of any military conflict. Now, although the relations with all these countries is not as ideal as we would like, it is a very, very significant step to make sure that the dragon is not left completely loose.